I just want to let everyone know that we will be recording this session. So if you ask any question with your mic or camera, that will probably end up being on the recording, just so everyone is aware. If there's any questions about that, feel free to direct message me. So just a way of introduction, the Digital South is a project born out of collaboration between UNC-Chapel Hill's university libraries and the Southern Futures Network at UNC-Chapel Hill. And the Digital South aims to foster collaborative and meaningful engagement between scholars that are using digital methods to study the American South. The title of today's panel is Alternatives to the Research Paper, and we have two wonderful presentations that we will be covering. So the two projects that we'll be folks will be presenting will be the Descendants project by Professor Glenn Hinson, who is in the Department of Folklore and Anthropology, and Mapping Karen Parker's journal, which will be presented by Banu Gökarıksel, Professor of Geography and Global Studies and Chair of Global Studies, Lara Lookabaugh, PhD in the Geography Department, and Sarah Carrier, who is our North Carolina Research and Instructional Librarian at Wilson Libraries. So I will let Glenn will be the first project that we will be hearing about. So I will hand the stage over to Glenn.
Thank you, Rolando. And I will begin before I share the screen with a disclaimer. The project that I'm about to describe, a project enacted by student research, encouraged by communities we're working, and enlivened, and I say that as in giving life to, by members of those communities, is one that I'm particularly poorly qualified to present. And I say that simply because I'm white. And the research that we're doing focuses on Black lives, Black families, and Black stories. In claiming this space as a white interlocutor, I recognize that I'm reifying and reinstating the systems that have historically denied voice to Black communities. There's no denying this. Further, the archives that I and my student colleagues are exploring were created as tools of supremacist practice, also engaged in that denying of voice and erasing of history. It's in this regard, it's important to note that the project I'm about to describe is not one that I direct. Rather, it's one that I help to facilitate, that my students and I craft in order to offer. We so that others, the communities, may create. So what do we compile? Where do we explore? And why do we pursue? The what is the fragments of lives died or lost to racial violence in North Carolina. The where begins the archive and leads to the kitchens and living rooms where descendants of those victimized by violence offer their testimonies. And the why is because we've been asked to do this. The Descendants Project invites students to archivally uncover the stories of those targeted by racial terror, to set these fragmented stories in the embracing and immediate context of family and community, and then to trace those families to the present day. We then contact those families and invite them to share their own stories, not of the violence endured by their ancestors, but of the ways that they craft meaning in the now. These recordings, in turn, are returned to the tellers, and if they wish, enter the collections here at UNC, creating vibrant and publicly available counter-narratives to the university's archival holdings. At the same time, The archival discoveries and telling testimonies are shared with the communities that have charged us to do this work, so that they might offer their own challenges to the claimings of supremacist history, and so that they can begin the work of reclaiming, redeclaring, and memorializing erased truths. Where's the digital in all of this? For us, at least at this point in the project, the digital points to the tools that we use rather than the products that we've created. Our point of entry is the digitized newspaper accounts of racial terror. To the digitized resources of census data, military documents, birth and marriage and death certificates, cemetery records, telephone books, and so much more. In pursuing this work, we begin with the foundational understanding that when attempting to tell stories of Black lives, relationships, and enacted meanings, the archive generally stands as a kind of crypt, a holding place that strategically silences Black story. Most historical archives, after all, are products of intentional collecting, where the intentionality has been historically guided by supremacist intent. The story told is traditionally a story of whiteness, with an eye towards celebration and commemoration. It's not, by purpose, a gathering of stories of those deemed unimportant, those not seen as worthy of remembering. Consequently, the archival record gives little accounting of Black lives. Instead, it deadens, devitalizes, and diminishes their fullness, carefully dismembering them, yielding only disembodied fragments, partialities. Our challenge is to take these fragments, often the only evidence we have of fully lived worlds of meaning, and reassemble them, remembering the dismembered, and fusing them with story, and thus with a measure of humanity. Now, these stories are still fragmentary. Bodies are still incomplete, still ghost-like. But there's a whisper of breath, a shiver of warmth. That's where the families and the communities enter the picture. They become the reanimators, those who invite the ghosts back into the communion of spirit, remembering them in the fellowship of the now. It's not for us to presume the right of reanimation, of bringing past lives to present life. Our job, instead, is to help prompt the conversations that bring those ghosts forward. And then to join these conversations, not as directors, but as listeners, and perhaps as collaborating co-speakers. So now I'd like to take you on a quick tour of the process, one that begins with the digitized records that the students explore, and that ends, at least in the moment, in performances informed by the students' research. And so we are going to move into this screen. So we begin with the basic story, and covered by the white media, in this case, Raleigh's and Observer. It tells us, in one of the stories we're investigating, of the 1921 lynchings of Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams. The local newspaper doesn't give us much help in this. The Warren Record refused to even cover the story in its own treatment, declaring that that story would not have been for the public good. The newspaper offers us this starkly decontexted story to understand, though, more fully the ecology of terror in Warren County. We look to maps such as this one from 1874 with Warrenton, the site of the lynching, right at the center of this agricultural county. From there, we look to the news accounts that offer us the most basic of information. And from there, we go to here the death certificate of Mr. Plummer Bullock. 1921, one of those invoked in that headline in the News and Observer. And obviously, if you check the cause of death, lynched by mob. It gives us little more than, as you'll notice, the names of the parents, William Bullock, Betsy Burrell Bullock. They're able to check out census records. In this case, the 1910 census, showing Plummer Bullock's name along with his names, giving us a sense of his family. 1920 is small. So we start with the 1910 census. There is a problem though, because the 1910 census is from a small industrial town in upstate New York called Batavia. It seems that the family that we have located on the census was living in New York, though they're all shown as being born in North Carolina. So we have a developing story that offers a question mark as we continue to do archival searching and discover this record of a World War I draft registration of one of those other people listed in that 1910 census, Matthew Bullock, Plummer Bullock's brother, here indicating that the family has relocated back to Warren County, and the parents' names clearly indicating that we're looking at the same family. From here, we move forward. During that 1930 census, the family reappears. Here, though, they're in Washington, D.C., a move that seems to have been prompted by the lynching of the son. We have a sense of who's left in the family. We have a sense of who's not here, all of which offer other avenues of searching. Meanwhile, the skeletal remains, really, that are offered us invite us to go to the community. Here, students are gathered in the Oak Level Church Cemetery in Warren County. This is Dr. Cosmos George, who is the president of local NAACP, guiding us in the on-the-ground search for more information of what was happening and what had happened and how it was remembered. From there, following the DC connection that we discovered in that 1930 census, we eventually located members of the Bullock family, most of whom seem to be living still in that DC-Baltimore area. After contacting them, we make arrangements with the National Museum of African American History and Culture to invite them there and conduct interviews on that site. Here, Kelly Navies, a Smithsonian curator, guiding the students through the museum's commitment and engagement with oral history. Here we've got descendants of one of the interview teams, students in the class, all undergraduates, interviewing Miss Louise Owens, the grandniece of Plummer Bullock. And Ms. Owens, after this lengthy interview, says, you know, I think that I actually have photographs of Reverend Bullock and Betsy Burwell Bullock. And she goes back home and searches, and then soon thereafter sends me these images. Finding these images, surprise, she also discovers, not knowing that she had it at all, a photograph of Plummer Bullock a year before he was murdered. Earlier, I spoke about ghosts. It's clear that the ghosts are here slowly beginning to materialize. Interviews and a search for more archival records, particularly when we're comparing the children who appear in that 1930 census and those that appear in the 1910, invite us to explore what happened to those other children. There are holes in the family record, and holes that the descendants that we've interviewed don't know. And so we go back to searching and discover, among other things, that one of the Bullock sisters, Plummer Bullock's sister, older sister, was married exactly a year before his lynching in Warren County. She apparently was a family member that stayed there in the county. Knowing that, though, invites us to find her descendants who tell us more stories about her. And as they unfold these stories, and we continue to do archival research, we present this to the community who decide to include part of her story. This is the story of Martha Bullock Sheeran, the sister of Plummer Bullock, in a production that they are doing this past summer, a reenactment of the trial of the 16 men who were arrested alongside Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams. Tammy, a UNC alum and a family descendant, as part of this project, writes a monologue representing the voice of Martha Sheeran as she stood in front of the courthouse on the day of her 1921 trial. She and 4 other monologue writers drew all of their material for these performances from Descendants Project research. Now what I want to do is show you what happened in this performance.
I get there early because I want to get a good spot near the door. I'm looking, and so far he is good, not too fussy. But it's 9 o'clock in the morning and it's warming up quick. There's already a crowd of colored folks, maybe 50 or so, at the courthouse. Mostly they're quiet, talking low amongst themselves. But there's an uneasiness, a restlessness. The white folks are coming up and going in. Some speak, others nod their heads at us. Miss Carol muffles a good morning under her breath like she don't want no one to know she's talking to us. She don't want to be rude either. Salome is in the laundry, and everybody knows Salome is the best laundress in town, and Miss Carol don't want to lose. We're not allowed in the courtroom, but Sarah Bradley has said that she will try to get out some news to us if she can. Sarah keeps, and she has always been decent to colored folks. She knows the colored town is out here waiting to hear something, and only the white folks can go in. Across the way near the monument, I see Tempe with her twin girl waving at me like they're in a parade. Tempe just nods in my direction. I nod back to let her know I see her. After Alfred and Plummer were killed, she came by almost every day to sit with my mama and try to see her through. Of course, Tempe was mourning herself with her Alfred gone and her children still at home. But I think it helped her to sit with my mama. We did all we could, but mama was just broken. So light and energy, and then he was just gone. White folks' mama knew all her life killed her boy, my brother, over wanted to nothing. Mama was so stricken, Daddy decided they had to leave Warren County. I pulled William Thomas a little bit closer, and he grabs hold of one of my braids. The crowd outside the courthouse has gotten larger now. Folks walking up in droves, some on mules. After George and I married last year, Plum and my brothers would come over and fish with us. I couldn't do much but sit anyway, since I was heavy with William. I was always tired. Plummer, he always had energy and would fish all day and all night if he could. And that boy was talking. He always had something to say about everything. He is less than a year younger than me, so we were close. Some folks even thought we were twins. But I'm not much of a talker like he was. I say what I need to say. I'm not asking questions and dragging out conversations like Plummer would. Miss Maggie Crossan comes over to greet me and William Thomas. Her grandsons Vinny and Richard are on trial for so-called rioting that night, 2 of them in the line of 16. She reaches for William Thomas and I hand him over, thankful for a short rest. We were young. Plummer used to say I was too much of a tomboy to be anybody's mother. The funny thing is, it was Plummer who dragged me to that dance where and of course, Plummer and Matthew and him raised up together. As soon as George and I started courting, Plummer, Matthew, and George started running around together, fishing and hunting, cutting up every chance they could. I swear those boys saw George almost as much as I did. George might have been with them that night at the train station, but William Thomas was colicky, and he stayed with me that night to watch him. Of course, everybody thought it was just going to be some tussling. Nobody expected guns on both sides. Folks in Colored Town knew something was going to happen. There had been threats, and folks were scared. But I don't think even the white folks knew some of their people would take it this far. A gunfight over some goddamn apples. And then they killed Alfred and Plummer. If I looked down the road when we were younger, I could not have imagined Plummer not seeing 20 years old and Matthew in Canada. I thought they both would just head north, back to New York eventually. Sarah Brantley comes to the door and hands me a note. I read it out loud to the people standing nearby, and within minutes, the crowd starts to rustle as the news spreads. Jerome Hunter gets 8 years, and a few others get jail time too, but not as much. The crowd gets restless. Someone yells, "What about the white ones?" And then, the trial don't ride by themselves. How come only colored on trial? What about Alfred Plummer? Alfred and Plummer, the killers on trial.
Essentially, and all that performance took the materials of the Descendants project into a very different place, drawing together the digital materials, the interviews that students had done, and bringing them together so that these simultaneous acts of remembering and remembering were able to bring these stories back into the community. As Tammy Evans, whom you just saw later, said, offering them back to the ancestors, letting them know that they have not been forgotten.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for that wonderful presentation. And we'll now open up the floor for the mapping Karen Parker's journal.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you so much, Glenn, for this telling us about your project, the project that you did with these wonderful people. So we are a team. Ours was a truly collaborative project as well. My name is Banu Gökarıksel, and I'm in the Department of Geography. And this project was part of an ongoing collaboration with Lara Lookabaugh and Sarah Carrier. So they're also going to be presenting parts of the project as well. And all of the students in this class completed the project, working in small groups. Only one person worked individually as well. So I will provide a brief introduction to the background, to Karen Parker, who Karen Parker is, and then what this course was about, and then Lara and Sarah will tell you more about the process and the archival research that went into this. So just to start with, I've taught at UNC since 2005, and I've taught various courses in geography, human geography, that take this question of space and how the places that we live in, study in, matter to who we are, how we experience the world, and how we are positioned in society. And a lot of these courses are also interested in looking at how we actively engage in creating or transforming those spaces, remaking those spaces. And I've also been interested in mapping as a practice to address some of these questions, often starting with the campus to understand the structure of this institution that we are a part of, how this campus, its layout, the monuments, the street names, the building names, the places that we occupy have a history that makes us all part of that history, experience that history, but also are made through the actions of many individuals that came before us, and we are also on a day-to-day basis are part of this process of recreating this campus and the power relations that lie within all these questions about who's included, who's excluded, as lived in this campus. So I've designed projects that have included archival research before, and that's how I actually got to meet Sarah Carrier. And I've also met other wonderful librarians at the Wilson Library, like Nick Graham, Jason Tomberlin, and Matt Turi, some of whom are, I think, part of, are among us as well. So in the previous versions of these kinds of mapping projects, it's been much more about identifying several key locations on campus and learning about the history of those specific places and how they have been produced through activism, through institutional power as well. And I've also been interested in ArcGIS and StoryMaps, especially because of how StoryMaps enables telling or tracing stories that can use multimedia. So you can have a map, but also it's very easy to write a narrative, an explanation and analysis of what you're seeing in the map, and then add videos or photographs that kind of enrich that story and also portray different points of view. And I've been experimenting with using StoryMaps and different maps when I led study abroad programs in Istanbul, in Berlin as well, and with Royster Fellows when I was working with Royster Fellows who are doctoral students who are awarded a Royster Fellowship as part of a conference that we organized together. And part of my interest has also become a part of my involvement in a feminist geography collective that focused on social justice issues on campus and did archival research and produced a zine called Ruptures that was very much about documenting especially Black student activism from the 1960s onwards around issues about the renaming of where geography was or is still housed, which was called Saunders Hall before. Now it has been renamed as Carolina Hall. So all of this is to say that there's a lot of background to this research that we are going to be presenting in terms of the relationships that I have been able to establish with our wonderful librarians and the Wilson Library, getting more familiar with the archives and how to design an archival project that is feasible and interesting for students, for undergraduate students, and just thinking more and getting more experience about how to design such a project. And this is Mapping Karen Parker's journal. The idea for this actually emerged in the first version of this class, Feminist Geographies, which was a brand new class that I've designed and started to teach in 2020, which was disrupted by the pandemic. And there it was a much more limited project, asking students to choose 4 locations that we identified on campus and to do research from a gender and racial justice point of view. But during that time, and Sarah Carrier was a part of that project, was the librarian who actually guided the research. Matt Turi was involved as well, and it was actually, and Lara Lookabaugh was the GRC graduate research consultant for that project. So I was already working with a lot of the same people. And I remember Matt Turi, as students were diving into archival material in these boxes, Matt Turi saying, well, we have this Karen Parker's journal. Wouldn't it be amazing to do a project focused just on that, just mapping this project, kind of thinking about it. So that kind of stuck with me, and I think stuck with Lara as well, because later on, Lara proposed the idea of actually designing a whole project around Karen Parker's journal. And I love that idea, and we all started to work together. Lara is going to tell you more about that in a little bit. So, the next time that I taught this class in the spring of 2021, we decided to focus just on this journal. I'm sorry, there's an ambulance passing by. For the whole semester, and really design a project that would be step by step, enabling students to work on this journal and use the journal as a launching off point to learn about Black women students' experiences during this time, 1963 to 65. So learn about the issues and debates on campus, learn about civil rights activism on campus and in Chapel Hill, and connect those to what was happening in the US more broadly. So the journal became our launching off point to think about social struggle and feminism, intersectional feminism that takes gender and race together at this moment in history. The course, yeah, we can scroll down, I think, thank you. And the course as a whole really aimed to understand how the spaces we occupy, claim as our own, and travel through affect who we are and how we're positioned in relation to others and in society, and how the course sought to understand how spaces matter for the production of gendered and racial differences and inequalities, and also how feminists develop spatial strategies to build alliances and mobilize for social justice. So Karen Parker fit perfectly for this kind of framing. And so in spring 2021, we set out to work on her journal throughout the semester in an environment that was completely remote. So this was completely done online. all of the research, all of the workshops, all of the course was conducted online. And we had 26 undergraduate students, most of whom were first-year students. So this is a lower-level undergraduate course. And many of them had never actually lived on campus. They were Zooming in from their homes. So this was also a very important introduction to the institution, to campus life for them. And many of them later on reflected on how it was very important to have this kind of an orientation to campus to understand really this history, and how it really made a difference in terms of becoming familiar with this university that they were now a part of. So just a little bit about Karen Parker. So Karen Parker was born in Salisbury, North Carolina, and grew up in Winston-Salem in North Carolina. In 1963, she transferred to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, from the Women's College in Greensboro, which is now UNC Greensboro. And she became the first Black woman undergraduate student to enroll at the university. So you see her marked in this fact book here. And Parker described in a 1999 interview on UNC TV how she was unaware at the time that she was blazing this trail. I kind of discovered this when they put me in a dorm on the 4th floor at the very top in a room by myself, and there was this empty bed, and I kept waiting for someone else to show up and nobody did. This is how she described her experience of arriving at UNC during this interview. And Parker became a journalism major. And then actually, she was a leader in civil rights activism. And after graduating from UNC, she pursued a very successful life as a journalist. She moved to Michigan, then she moved back to North Carolina, and had a very kind of very successful life. And maybe we can show a little bit of her video. She's also recognized as a trailblazer by the university now, and is very vocal when it comes to issues about especially the inclusion of Black people on campus, and issues concerning the School of Journalism as well. So let's hear a little bit about Karen Parker. So one of the special things that we did was actually inviting Karen Parker to come to class, to visit at the beginning of the class after students have read her journal, and tell us about her experiences via Zoom on campus, and how she actually wrote the journal. And then we were in touch with her throughout the project as the project progressed, and we invited her again to come and actually see the student presentations again on Zoom, and ask questions and make comments. So she has, and it was very important for all of us to have her presence as part of the project, and to see what we were doing with the journal as well. And students actually commented on how important it was to them to realize that this journal that they were reading was actually written by a real living person who's, still here, is engaged, and someone that they can, kind of be inspired by. So that was really important. So yes, Karen Parker.
I restricted it to events that were significant, particularly significant to me. So it wasn't a daily entry kind of thing. They were major events in my life. I came about starting it, I had a friend on the Winston-Salem newspaper, and I was always complaining to him about things that were going on down at UNC. And he said, you ought to write that down. because it might come in handy one day. And it has come in handy quite a bit. So that is how, I'd like to call it a journal, not a diary. That is how it came about.
Yes. Lara, would you like to take over?
Sure. Thanks, Banu. I'll be brief. Thank you so much for coming. And yes, thank you so much to Rolando and everyone involved in Digital South series for inviting us here. So my name is Lara. I'm a PhD student in geography, and I had the opportunity to work on this project as a Humanities for the Public Good Fellow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the prep and behind the scenes work that went into making the StoryMap a reality. So in order for us to have the students make such a well-researched and compelling final product, which I'll scroll a bit through in a moment, there was just like an incredible amount of behind the scenes and prep work that had to be done, which really started in the fall semester, but, you know, as Banu mentioned, goes back years and years through her bringing classes, through the just amazing expertise of everyone at Wilson Library. And, you know, it's really kind of a story about this expertise, and then also the relationships between Karen and the libraries, and between Banu and the librarians, and just everybody involved. So, so we started this back when everything was remote. So we were really fortunate that Karen's journal had already been digitized. And that, of course, librarians like Sarah have this really deep knowledge about the history of UNC and North Carolina and the actual collections. So as I mentioned, I was a Humanities for the Public Good Fellow with Wilson Library from 2019 to 2021. And in the first year of my fellowship, I was helping with the Women at UNC student curated exhibit. And that whole process really ramped up my knowledge about UNC history and allowed me this amazing time to learn about the materials at Wilson. I just got to spend hours going through different collections and seeing what was there. So as an HBG fellow, I also had this dedicated paid time to work only on this project. So that was really important. So I learned from working on the Women at UNC exhibit that narrowing down the scope of the project is really important for students to be successful. So that meant a lot of prep work to identify the relevant collections, the places, and really the feasibility of being able to do research on a specific place that Karen mentioned in her journal. And that was really compounded by the fact that we were doing everything remote. So the first part of my process of actually prepping for the class was to go through and do a really close reading of Karen's journal, which I hadn't done previously. I was familiar with some pages and some of the content. But as I went through and read, I indexed it for all of the places that she mentions and the pages that they appear on. So you can see that here in this spreadsheet. So what we ended up doing was, you know, the place, we had to figure out the actual location of that place. And, you know, a lot of these places have obviously changed since the 1960s. So there was a little detective work there. And then we had to identify any primary sources that we knew of in Wilson that were related to these places. So this is the sort of index spreadsheet that we were kind of starting working with. And we did the same thing for people. Karen mentions a lot of different people. She also had a lot of relationships that were sort of shaping her time at Carolina. So we did that, and students actually ended up drawing a lot on these relationships in some of their story maps. And then finally, we had to think about, you know, the context in which Karen was living through these experiences on campus and writing her journal, and how to make sure students understood Jim Crow segregation, that UNC was a school for only white men for most of its existence, and the histories of these struggles for racial justice and gender equity, especially how they happened in Chapel Hill and the Triangle. And so Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about the digital archive that we put together for this, but this is in this document, it's kind of like a jumping off point where we put together different primary sources for each location. But at the beginning, you know, we sort of started everyone out with the actual journal, sort of secondary sources that would give students an overview of these historical events. And they ended up sort of coming together as a timeline at the beginning of the story map that sort of situates this moment in time and the struggles that Karen was working through. So the timeline is here on the story map. That's actually all I have. Very short, like I said, and I'll pass it to Sarah. And while she's getting ready, I'll just kind of scroll down so you can see some of the stories.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, if you want to jump all the way down to the bottom, I'll just add to what Laura's been talking about as far as the process, which I mean, culminated in a couple years of thinking and planning and talking. And the summer before that semester, we started meeting and hammering out the logistics of this. So, and it was just really wonderful to have Laura's dedicated time as a fellow. And I think that that's really one of the main things that I just wanted to emphasize is, you know, this is a really wonderful, but also unusual experience. For all intents and purposes, I was embedded with this class, and Lara was as well as a fellow. So a really great and also unique opportunity here. But at the very bottom, it's great because there is a little note and a bit of elaboration about this process. And I'll just say that my responsibilities as a reference and instructional librarian include facilitating and promoting effective access to the special collections. So whenever I'm working on a question or working with a class, I ask, well, what's possible in the collections? And it's never productive or a positive experience to have students just let loose upon the archives, especially if they're first-year students, novice researchers, they haven't worked a lot with primary sources. So I'm always doing a little bit of planning and preparation and curation, scaffolding to help students feel successful and so that they can produce scholarship at a high quality level. So what we have here is, and actually Laura, if you wanted to kind of click on that image, that screenshot of the Dropbox. The only thing I'm going to really elaborate upon is it's kind of the nitty gritty of it, maybe not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, but it was, again, a part of this incredibly crucial planning and scaffolding that we put together and as a team. So what I ended up doing based on the spreadsheet that you saw with all of the events, dates, locations that Laura pulled out, I went to the collections. So Laura was also going to the digitized materials, but doing so from Florida. And so I was really the only person, you know, on site, if you will, kind of looking through things. And so I was trying to figure out, well, what do we have? Do we have material about this time period? Do we have material about this site? What can the students access to help them build context so that they can write a piece about this? Of course, they're going to need digitized material. They're going to need images and scans so that they can insert into the entry itself, but none of them were coming to us and working in person. So what I did is I built a virtual archive. And Laura's Deep Reading absolutely facilitated this. And so I created different categories based on format with all of these particular sites and events in mind. And of course, within that, there's a lot of variety. I wanted for the students to feel as much of a freedom of choice as possible as well, and some flexibility. And one thing that I wanted to emphasize too is that Laura and I were meeting with the students throughout the semester. So as individuals, as groups, we led primary source workshops. Lara led at least one story map workshop, and we worked closely with the Research Hub. A colleague there came and gave a presentation. So we were at arm's length the entire time, even though this was very much a completely remote class and a virtual archival research experience. Okay, so this just made the most sense for us, and I think that it was effective. What I found when I started going to the materials is I found, well, some of these things are already digitized, a lot of them are not. But I knew when we even started fathoming this, that there were some photographs, some documents that would be integral to telling the story. So I already started kind of anticipating and planning, like, let's go ahead and have this digitized. And then as the students requested things, I either was able to fit it into our established workflow, or I digitized it myself. I did it on one of our scanners, or sometimes I even took a photo with my phone and made it work. So I'm going to send it back to Banu for some, I think Banu, you may have some feedback or some responses from some of the students, and to close out our presentation. But thank you so much for tuning in.
So in the interest of time, maybe I will yield to Rolando to see if we have received any questions. I'm also happy to talk about student responses, but I'll leave it up to everybody else who are interested, whatever they're interested in hearing about.
Thank you so much, Banu, and thank you both teams for your amazing presentations. I haven't received any questions, but I just want to go ahead and open the floor to see if anyone has any questions about either presentation. If not, I have my own questions. It seems like a couple folks are interested about the student experiences. So yeah, maybe we could talk about that. So yeah, why don't we open up student responses as a question to both teams? Maybe we can begin with you, Banu, and then we'll go to you, Glenn.
Happy to start with that. Student response, engaging in these projects have essentially said that they find themselves by the end of the semester transformed in their understanding. That this is an eminently personal journey for many of those students. The majority of students in these classes, the Descendants project classes, have been African American, and for them, this is a step into narrations and ways of thinking about past histories that they haven't considered before. So many of these stories that they're finding are stories not only that they hadn't heard, but more importantly, stories that they didn't know how to find. And in searching for the stories, found themselves becoming increasingly frustrated by the archival limitations. And then discovering on top of that, that when they speak to consultants in the community, that suddenly there is a wealth and a richness that contrasts so sharply with the narrative thinness that the archive has offered. So they've tended to step out of these courses feeling that there's so much more to say and to learn, and importantly, in many cases, with a desire, trying to figure out how can they re-engage this project. So a number of students have actually, at this point, come back for a second, and in some cases, a third year as undergraduate research mentors with the course, so that they can both help guide others into this kind of work, but also so that they can continue to do the work themselves.
Great, thank you. So in terms of mapping Karen Parker's journal, there were some interesting reflections. Students, in addition to writing, contributing to the story map, they also wrote reflection essays that that reflected on how what they did, this kind of research, how it related to course topics and concepts. And they wrote beautifully about that in terms of bodies as sites of resistance and the spatial strategies of resistance that were used during that time, during the civil rights era. They made connections to Black Lives Matter, for example, and the role of institutions, the police, drawing parallels between what was happening then in the 1960s and what's happening now. They also reflected on the limitations of archives. Especially one student really nicely put this, and she said, she described how she set out to examine specifically the role of Black women in the civil rights movement and sit-ins that were organized at local restaurants. And then she quickly realizing that there was very little documentary evidence of that in the archives that we have. And then she wrote, and then like her writing and research took another direction, and she wrote, I really learned how to let the archive guide my story rather than the other way around. Even though there was a story I wanted to tell, the archive gave me the opportunity to tell a different, equally important story. So she actually wrote about how people walked out and organized sit-ins and did all of that kind of really powerful activism. Another student wrote about how, as a student of color, she often feels like she does not belong at UNC today, but researching and learning about Karen Parker's experience made her proud of attending UNC and realizing the resilience of women like Karen Parker, who went against all odds to make her presence today possible. So it was moments like that really kind of made those reflections kind of show the impact of this project made on students' understanding of who they are and this kind of broader context that they are a part of and contributing to. And each one had a much more kind of academic intellectual relations, but reflections, but also personal impact that they often wrote about.
Thank you so much, Lee, for sharing. Seeing that we only have about a minute left, so I'm wondering if folks have any follow-up questions. Could they email you? If so, is there, if y'all want to put like your email addresses in the chat, that might be helpful for folks who might want to contact you, or folks can also email me and I can direct your questions. Thank you both so much for sharing about your projects and just showing how digitized material data has such impact, and whether we're talking about folks that are currently with us or folks in the past, that has real material effects to populations here today. And I think that, as you both just shared, has the real deep impact on students in ways that sometimes just writing about collections can't capture, but actually experiencing that material in different ways can allow students to engage with them in newer and exciting, or in some cases not exciting ways, where it shouldn't be exciting. But again, thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We will be having some more panels in the spring, so look out for announcement for those. I hope you'll have a great Wednesday. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rolando.
Thank you for organizing and inviting us, Rolando.
Absolutely. Thank you all.